Now, we've been talking about the Iranian media, and we have breaking news coming in. Iranian media has said that Iran-U.S. negotiations have ended, with the two sides not reaching an agreement. It said various issues, including Strait of Hormuz, nuclear rights, have been among the points of contention in Iran-U.S. talks, adding that U.S. excessive demands have hindered a common framework and agreement. Now, of course, these are the remarks coming in from the Iranian media. Of course, another Iranian media, Fars news agency, has said that the path to the deal hinges on U.S. changing its unreasonable demands and that the Strait of Hormuz is one of several contentious issues to be resolved. Now, the agency said experts on both sides are working to find common ground and that the Pakistani mediator is trying to resolve differences and bring opinions. Both negotiating teams have stepped back to consult with their respective expert teams on proposed text, with talks set to resume once those drafts are ready. Now, of course, another Iran media has said Iran-U.S. negotiations have ended, with the two sides not reaching an agreement. Now, this, of course, reaction that we were discussing, Professor Kefiero, about this Iranian media saying that there's no agreement, but it seems like there would be some consultations or proposed talks that will be happening in the coming weeks between these ceasefire to happen. And it's very interesting because you also mentioned that, we have the Strait of Hormuz. There were media reports of these two warships, USS Frank E. Peterson, USS Michael Murphy, in the waters of the Strait of Hormuz. Now, what CENTCOM had posted saying that the U.S. forces had begun setting conditions for clearing mines in the Strait of Hormuz and that the two vessels transited the Strait of Hormuz. Now, this was clearly denied by Iran. Professor Kefiero, do you think that there might be a chance of escalation considering the fact that you have these U.S. assets already ready in the West Asian region?
Well, yes, obviously the situation in the Gulf and elsewhere in the region, it's extremely intense right now. So it would not take much for the very fragile ceasefire to completely collapse at any moment, as I've mentioned before. But I do want to also make another point here that between now and when this 2-week period is over, I'm expecting not only Pakistan, but other states in West Asia, such as Turkey, Egypt, and Oman, which all want to see some sort of a diplomatic breakthrough very badly. All of these countries share a vested interest in de-escalation. They do not want to see the warfare between U.S. and Israel on one side and Iran on the other resume. So I certainly am expecting in upcoming days, Pakistan, as well as those other countries I mentioned, to try to do everything they can in their capacities as bridging states. Whether those efforts will be successful or not, we don't know. It will be very difficult for them to try to mediate between Washington and Tehran and to help the two countries find some middle area where they can compromise and reach a deal. But I think we're going to see an intensification of those efforts in these upcoming days.
And also, because we're talking about the other countries, we had reports saying that Pakistan's Foreign Minister Shahzad had flown to Beijing to seek Chinese backing for a 5-point peace plan to end this conflict. As you know, of course, Trump's remarks had come on that as well, saying that China would face big problems if it ships arms to Iran. Considering the fact that China's role here with the Pakistani Foreign Minister in Beijing right now, what kind of role do you think China will be playing, or would they be playing any role diplomatically or militarily?
Well, obviously, China is an extremely important country to Iran, and there's certain influence that China has over Iran that no other country in the world has. And therefore, I think we can see Beijing perhaps using its leverage, using its geoeconomic clout to try to push Tehran toward a position of being a little more flexible in these talks, because China certainly wants to see de-escalation in the Middle East. All of this chaos and warfare, very, very bad for China's ambitions in the Middle East, which really depend on stability, peace, and more trade, more investment. So I think there is a very productive role that China could play. Again, to answer your question, I think it's going to be more on the diplomatic side. I don't think China will want to get caught up too much in the military side of this. China tends to avoid intervening in conflicts. And I think China would be very careful before taking any steps that would result in perceptions based in reality or not of China being sort of an all-out Iran ally that's very much backing up Tehran. I think China is going to be very careful about taking steps that could lead to that perception.
Right, and also I would like me to give any kind of perspective on JD Vance, because of course he happened to be, of course, the vice president going for talks here, the senior-most delegation, and then of course we had remarks from Trump saying that if a deal is done, it's my win, and if we fail, then it's Vance, because of the fact that Vance has been saying that they were being flexible and accommodating, but they did not land a deal. What does this mean for JD Vance?
It's a very good question. It's useful to see this also from the standpoint of domestic politics in the United States. Many people see J.D. Vance as sort of the heir to the MAGA throne, which makes sense given his position as Trump's vice president and also given his politics as well. And this war is not necessarily very popular among elements within the MAGA base who see it as a betrayal of the America First agenda and who see the administration sort of putting Israel first. Among right-wing segments in the United States, that's certainly an interpretation shared by many. So I think the idea of J.D. Vance playing a role in diplomacy here is something that sits well with many in Trump's base and just sort of right-wing circles in the United States who are not in favor of Operation Epic Fury. I also think at the same time there is baggage between Kushner and Witkoff on one side and the Iranians on the other. We obviously can recall the talks that were taking place earlier this year, and then also those talks that were taking place in the lead up to last year's 12-day war. I think when we have Vance involved, it maybe possibly has a little bit of potential to set a new tone and to change the dynamics and maybe give the Iranians a little bit more reason to be optimistic about what can come out of this, what can come out of such dialogue. And we do know that the Iranians have indicated that their preference is for dealing with Vance as opposed to Witkoff or Kushner.
Right. And just adding to that, when Vance says, when we look at these remarks coming from Vance, where he says that we're going back with a no deal, there is no mention of talks. But when the Iranian media says that there will be talks going forward, how do you assess this dynamic from the U.S. side and the Iranian side saying that there will be talks going forward?
Well, it's not that surprising. The fact that J.D. Vance is not talking about a new round certainly doesn't mean that there's not going to be a new round. Going back to a point I was making a few minutes ago, I think the tone from Vance and the U.S. side here is one of being very confident, trying to send out the message that it is going to be Iran's loss, not the United States' loss, if an agreement is not reached. And therefore, the administration is not determined to get an agreement at all costs. An agreement only can come if Iran is willing to respect the Trump administration's red lines. So I think, obviously in these types of situations, the signaling, the messaging is always really important. And that is really how I'm reading sort of the tone set forth by Vance as he is declaring that this 21 hours or whatever in Islamabad failed to bring the two sides to an agreement.
Right. And the fact that there were some experts saying that, yes, it's very difficult because there are so many points of contention, since there are some reports of talks to happen in the coming days. Do you see these talks, 21-hour talks, as a failure or a win, considering the situation it happened in?
Well, I would have to ask, do you mean a failure or a win for the United States or for one of the other countries? From which perspective?
Absolutely. I would like to perspective on which one won here. Is it Iran or U.S. for them individually? Do these talks seem to be like a win for after 21 hours or a loss?
Well, I think what ultimately matters is what these talks produce. I definitely do think that a continuation of this war is going to be very disastrous from the standpoint of U.S. interests. I also think that is true for Iranian interests. We see the widespread humanitarian disasters, the horrific human suffering in Iran. All of that would obviously exacerbate to entirely new levels if the very intense American and Israeli military operations and bombing campaigns resume. So I think both sides are going to lose if there is an inability to find a way to compromise and reach an agreement. But both sides will, of course, try to spin this and make it seem as though they have the upper hand. And I think it should be noted that the fact that Iran's government is still in power after not only the 12-day war in June of last year, but also since February 28th, it's certainly a sign of resilience. And I think probably after the mass protests that took place in December of last year and January of this year, I think the war has certainly given the regime an opportunity to sort of tighten up unity and support within Iran. So in some ways, we have to recognize that the war has served interests of the Iranian government. Obviously, many of the very high-ranking officials, including the previous supreme leader, were killed in this war, but nonetheless, the regime has proven to be very resilient, and its strategies for surviving a war waged on Iran by the world's most powerful military force, as well as the Middle East's most powerful military force, both being nuclear armed states, speaks to that resilience. But again, that is not to be dismissive of the fact that the Iranian people have suffered so much, not only since February 28th, but especially since Operation Epic Fury began. The massive destruction of civilian infrastructure in the country has made life very, very difficult. But again, I'll repeat the point. This war has been an opportunity for the Islamic Republic to really demonstrate its strength and resilience.
Right.
And that is going to certainly have an impact on Iran's image in the Middle East, probably for many years to come.
All right, well, 21 hours of talks and no agreement, but, well, the ceasefire does exist. I will have to wait and see if the talks happen and going forward. Thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your perspective. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you. Thank you.